You're a college kid, in 2008, obsessed with a cappella. You and your singing group just got invited to an all-expenses-paid festival hosted by millionaires, featuring industry legends and promising once-in-a-lifetime workshops. Sounds incredible, right? And honestly, it should be, because a cappella is having a moment. Pitch Perfect is still a few years away, but groups are blowing up on YouTube. The Sing-Off is about to hit TV, and suddenly the dorkiest kids on campus are the cool ones. But now, imagine halfway through this dream event, you realize the people running it don't actually care about music. They care about you, your mind, your loyalty, your willingness to recruit others. And by the time you figure it out, they've already got your phone number, your home address, and for some reason, they've asked for your social security number. That's when someone logs into a message board and types 5 words that change everything. Wait. Is this a cult? What happens next? A digital firefight, a forum war, and a bunch of music nerds accidentally stopping a cult before it could take root in their world. Welcome to the weirdest chapter of the NXIVM saga. In the early 2000s, 2 seemingly unrelated movements were growing in parallel. One was about harmony, the other was about control. First, a cappella. For years, it was a punchline, something your high school choir teacher begged you to try. But then something changed. A cappella groups weren't just nerdy side projects anymore. They were thriving. YouTube gave them an audience, college competitions gave them stakes, and suddenly singing without instruments wasn't just fun, it was marketable. Groups like Straight No Chaser went viral, even major record labels were starting to pay attention. If you were in a top-tier a cappella group, you weren't just a college musician, you were part of something bigger. But what made these groups so special wasn't just the music. It was hours of practice, shared goals, and a sense of belonging. A cappella wasn't just a hobby, it was a family. And when you're in a family, you trust the people around you. That trust, it's what made a cappella powerful, but it's also what made it vulnerable. At the same time, in a very different world, something else was rising. NXIVM, a so-called self-improvement company built around the teachings of one man, Keith Raniere. Raniere promised his followers success, clarity, purpose. But beneath the surface, NXIVM wasn't about empowerment. It was about obedience. The deeper you got, the harder it was to leave. Your peers weren't just friends, they were your lifeline. Your mentors weren't just teachers, they controlled your future. NXIVM knew how to recruit. It started with a simple offer, a life-changing experience, an exclusive community, a chance to push yourself further than ever before. But once you were in, you were in. You didn't just join NXIVM, you belonged to it. And NXIVM needed more followers, more high-achieving, ambitious people willing to give up everything to be a part of something greater. So they looked for tight-knit groups full of driven young people who already thrived in mentorship and loyalty. And that's where they found a cappella. Now, if you don't know much about NXIVM, stop what you're doing and go watch The Vow on HBO or Seduced on Stars. Or honestly, just Google NXIVM branding scandal and prepare to fall down the most disturbing Wikipedia rabbit hole of your life. Our story? This is just one of the weirder footnotes in NXIVM's long, bizarre history. But make no mistake, if things had gone differently, it might not have been just a footnote. So, why were a cappella groups the perfect target for NXIVM? Well, these groups spend hours together every single week. And that's exactly why NXIVM saw them as the perfect mark. They weren't after the music or the talent, it was about mindset. They wanted people who were driven, hungry for success, open to mentorship. Sound familiar? Well, that's exactly the kind of people who excel in a cappella. NXIVM wanted the best and the brightest, the people who are already weird to crave mentorship and validation. They found those people in acting, in business, in elite athletics. A cappella was just an untapped gold mine. So they built a Trojan horse, a seemingly innocent, well-funded, high-prestige event that would attract the best a cappella groups in the country. A place where NXIVM could introduce itself without anyone realizing what was happening. That Trojan horse was called A Cappella Innovations. The festival was pitched as an elite opportunity for rising a cappella groups. No entry fee, travel and lodging covered. Celebrity hosts on the lineup. A chance to perform for major industry names? Absolutely. On paper, it was the kind of event any a cappella group would dream of attending. It had all the credibility and prestige of a real industry showcase. And why wouldn't it? It was bankrolled by an actual billionaire heiress. Clare Bronfman, the Seagram's Harris and NXIVM's biggest financial backer, paid for everything. The venue, the travel, the accommodations, and just to make it seem even more legitimate, NXIVM brought in actual celebrities from their network to host the event. That meant TV stars like Christian Cruick, Allison Mack, and Nikki Klein, all NXIVM members, were there smiling on stage. Nothing seemed off at first. The inaugural A Cappella Innovations Festival, held in December of 2007 at the Egg in Albany, felt like any other music conference. College groups from all over the country showed up, performed, and attended workshops. The event had real a cappella judges, real industry names, and on the surface, everything seemed totally above board. By all accounts, attendance had a good time. The weekend included traditional performances, panel discussions, and even a closing concert. If there was an agenda beyond music, it wasn't obvious yet. And so when NXIVM invited groups to come back for a second event in 2008, many of them said yes. But something changed, because the 2008 festival, that's when NXIVM dropped the act. At first, the second A Cappella Innovations Festival in 2008 seemed like more of the same, a weekend of performances, workshops, and networking. But almost immediately, something felt off. It started as a whisper, a few singers talking quietly in the hallways, in hotel lobbies, between performances. Something about A Cappella Innovations 2008 felt wrong. The workshops weren't just about singing anymore, they were about self-improvement. The event wasn't about networking, it was about finding your true potential, and then there were the personal questions. What is your greatest weakness? What would you sacrifice to achieve your dreams? Are you living in a way that honors your true self? For some people, these were just abstract questions, but for others, alarm bells were ringing. And that's when someone logged onto a message board and started typing. A single forum post. A small, niche a cappella message board that hasn't been online for decades. A place where singers used to debate mic placement and baritone arrangements in the early 2000s, and an anonymous and brand new account with their first post. The entire atmosphere was drastically different than that of the first festival, and our group, as well as every other group with which we discussed these concerns, feels very unsettled. Our only reason for presenting this information is to encourage other a cappella groups to think about the intentions of this organization before committing themselves to something they may not be prepared for. The first reply was, "This is weird, let us know what's going on in there." And another, "This whole thing leaves a very bad taste in my mouth. Any one of the things that the poster mentioned should raise red flags, let alone all of them together. I understand that an organization with pockets deep enough to hire some of the best groups around is alluring, especially when most events like this are run on a shoestring. But we should think very carefully about getting collectively and individually involved in something like this." Then someone who was actually there chimed in. "I'm back from the festival. Of somewhat more immediate concern for me, as an educator of your age group in particular, are the requests by the festival for sensitive, personal information." And a follow-up. "The asking for social security numbers strikes me as a bit bizarre indeed. A group from my school attended this weekend, so I'm planning on asking them for more information on how exactly the conference went down." What I think the festival has done well is bring outside financing to a cappella, but the way in which they've done it is a bit suspect. It wasn't all bad news. In the ensuing discussion, someone asked how acclaimed a cappella group Fork did. Let me put it this way. Fork created the Egg and cooked up the biggest, tastiest, are you fucking kidding me-est a cappella omelet this side of Let There Be Light. A day after traveling for 15 hours to get to Albany and taking their first steps on stage at 3:30 a.m. Helsinki time. More reviews started coming in as travelers made it home. From the very moment we got there, the staff was overly friendly to us. At times, their eagerness to get on our good side came off as a blatant sales pitch. We were assured that if at any point we felt uncomfortable with a discussion, the conversation could be changed. This is probably one of the first places where I started to get suspicious of what was going to be taken away from the weekend. It seemed that we were constantly under surveillance. User MCBC offered a very persistent take on things so far. It's lending legitimacy to what could be something quite creepy. Best case scenario, this is all nothing, and huzzah, you got to rub elbows with Blake Lewis. And worst case, yikes much, and there'll be an Associated Press reporter calling all of you investigating Cappella ties to cult organization. Wire stories get started over much less. There is no reason to collect social security numbers. None. And remember, this was over 10 years before there literally would be hundreds of national wire stories about NXIVM. The original poster popped back up. He did not have time for people ignoring his post or talking about how badass the other performances were. I don't understand why everyone is so quick to laugh this off either. This is the point of a slow but steady attempt at forging this organization's way into a new demographic. NXIVM wanted to branch out and reach an as-yet untapped group of people, gullible 18 to 25-year-olds. Where should they start? College, the perfect group of people. Attendance in these workshops was mandatory. They were run only by members of either Simply Human. The after party that night was sponsored by 10C this time. It was held in a shady warehouse in downtown Troy. The venues, as well as the hotels that the groups were put up in, were extremely remote with respect to the location of the egg. Once I had arrived to the 10C party, I couldn't easily go back to my hotel room without coordinating our entire group and taking a 20-minute drive to get back there. Many of you think that I'm exaggerating, that I'm reading into minuscule details, but I really do believe that these events won't hesitate to turn up the heat each time, changing yet another aspect of it that will alienate participants from their ideals and realms of comfortability even more. Suddenly, a lot of positive posts from brand new users came flooding into the thread. NXIVM had become aware of this thread, and they were ready to jump in. First up was longtime member Siobhan Huddling. The way I see it, there's a bunch of us putting ourselves out there trying to put on a kick-ass a cappella festival. And while there may have been some missteps, people are choosing to focus on things that have nothing to do with the festival itself. That said, yes, I am affiliated with NXIVM, and in fact work for the organization. It is nothing that I've ever hidden from anyone. In fact, it's something I'm actually quite proud of. I have known Keith for 8 years and consider him to be a good friend, indeed one of the most modest, unassuming, and humane individuals I have ever met. I believe his intentions are nothing but good and proactive towards the a cappella community. I hope that we can work to resolve this so that we can all work together. I think everyone here wants the same thing, to promote something we love, and that is nothing to be fearful or suspicious of. Another member, Kurt Walker, tagged in. I will say, as someone who is very involved in planning both events from start to finish, and as a judge, that this event is meant to help a cappella grow and edify and uplift the attendees as well as the coordinators. I have spent much time personally with Keith and have worked daily with Clare to make these events effective. I know personally of their love for the art form of singing and know they are sincere in their interest to assist in its proliferation all over the world. Nikki and Allie, or Allison Mack, were willing to open their lives and themselves to our community when privacy is a rare thing in the music and film business, as well as give of their time, only to be disrespected. What incentive do we give others who might want to stand behind the banner of vocal music if we treat them in this way? If Keith is so nuts, why would Virgin stand between him? Why would Richard Branson donate money for us to put on an event? That last line is classic NXIVM. Latch on to a respected public figure, secure a financial or symbolic endorsement, and then wield it as a shield against criticism. They did it with Richard Branson, the Dalai Lama, and Hollywood celebrities, as if writing a check or posing for a photo somehow erased the red flags. One of the attendees came back hard. They said, if the weekend is going to focus on emotional journeys through performance, tell groups beforehand. This would remedy any uncertainties of sharing private information. When a concert or event is sponsored by Pepsi, you know that it's sponsored by Pepsi. This is not the case for ACI. There's no mention of NXIVM or 10C on the ACI website. I still have no freaking clue what 10C is. This information needs to be made public prior to the conference so groups can research the contributors beforehand and make an educated decision on whether or not they want to participate. And then, in the middle of the chaos, the most famous name in the thread appeared: Allison Mack. Yes, that Allison Mack, the TV star best known for playing Chloe Sullivan on Smallville. At the time, she was still a rising celebrity, with over 6 million viewers tuning in to watch her each week. But what people didn't know at the time was that she was also deeply embedded in NXIVM, one of Keith Raniere's most devoted followers, and soon to be one of the key figures in its darkest chapter. Her post, in a word, well, unhinged. Mack begins with an immediate misdirection. She acknowledges that she had a weird experience at the festival, but not because of NXIVM, of course. I too had a really weird experience this weekend, but it had nothing to do with the festival Cappella Innovations, but more around the people at Innovations. This is a classic NXIVM tactic. Take any criticism and immediately flip it back onto the critic. The problem isn't that people were raising concerns about the festival. The problem is that people are asking too many questions. My partner and I were surrounded by 6 large, angry men who were not interested in hearing the answers to their questions, but only interested in proving their suspicions. Let's break that down. At no point does she clarify who these men were or what they actually did, only that they made her feel threatened. There are no specifics, just vague accusations designed to paint the skeptics as aggressors. This wasn't a heated debate on a message board anymore. According to Mack, it was a witch hunt. Although the men that approached us at the party claimed to be asking innocent questions, it felt very threatening, intrusive, and it was extremely physically inappropriate. What exactly was physically inappropriate? She never says, just that it felt that way. One of the most chilling parts of Mack's post is how she frames criticism as paranoia. The people questioning NXIVM, they're not uncovering anything, they're just seeing what they want to see. I guess if you're looking to prove things are weird, you can with anything. It's gaslighting, plain and simple. The idea that if you find something suspicious, it's only because you were trying to find something suspicious. It's the same kind of logic NXIVM used on its members. If you're uncomfortable, that's a sign that you're resisting growth. In other words, the problem isn't NXIVM, the problem is you. I hope to see this community handle this situation in a way that is upholding and dignified rather than immature and petty. That being said, I look forward to witnessing the way all of this is handled, because I can promise you that you're not making any fans with this behavior. In other words, shut up or you'll ruin everything. Mack's aggressive defense seemed to work. One of the organizers of the event replied, "Kurt and others have forcefully expressed my own experience of working with ACI's organizers, especially Clare. I haven't personally had the impression that ACI is about anything else. 10C, moreover, gets to do whatever it wants. And if what it wants is to put the actual social back in social networking, then as a professor of the humanities, I say power to you, Allison and Nikki." A more level-headed message boarder user surmised, real cults don't work the way people think. They're made up of, by and large, very normal people who could come across to a stranger as well-adjusted and not crazy at all. That's why dismissing concerns just because the organizers seemed nice is naive. I mean, come on, it's a bunch of creepy pseudoscience bullshit, and it centers around the supposed genius of this one man who's made out to be virtually superhuman. And sure, NXIVM is known to recruit in less than transparent ways, but at the end of the day, it's an incredible deal. And for the chance to see Fork or something, I mean, how bad can a little cult be? Suddenly, the event turned away from NXIVM. It was about a single a cappella group. The Binghamton Crosbys, an anonymous but assumed to be NXIVM member, posted, "Will the urine-slinging, fecal matter-tossing, disrespectful, generally slackless, self-absorbed assholes known to all of you as the Binghamton Crosbys please stand up?" According to multiple posters, members of the Crosbys had allegedly trashed their hotel rooms, destroying property, and most shockingly, flung human waste during their time at Cappella Innovations. What should have been a thread uncovering a potential cult infiltration of Cappella suddenly became a flame war over whether a bunch of college singers had literally shit all over the festival. A new thread spun off immediately, with furious accusations flying. The hotel confirms that rooms were left in despicable condition. If the damage was indeed caused by groups attending the festival, then Michael is right that they should be ashamed on their own behalf, and sincerely apologetic for the damage done to the reputations of everyone involved in the festival. For some, this was the perfect distraction, whether intentional or not. As one poster put it, "This is what happens when you mix a cappella, free alcohol, and a cult-sponsored event in the middle of nowhere." Well said. But here is the real twist. One of the members of the Binghamton Crosbys, by the way, such a difficult name to say, who was there that weekend would later become famous for a very different reason. His name? John Wilson. Years later, Wilson would recount his surreal experience in an episode of HBO's How To with John Wilson. Wilson explained that at Cappella Innovations. Kurt Walker, one of the event organizers and a NXIVM supporter, mentions that the Crosbys didn't just trash their hotel room. They allegedly vandalized it in grotesque ways. Myself and one other judge outside of the NXIVM group called the hotel and, independently of one another, confirmed that the damage done to the room was more than wrappers and fast food. The accounts of carbonated drinks sprayed all over, fire extinguishers released, and urine and feces being dispersed are not rumors. Brent Steffens delivers the most brutal and memorable reaction to the vandalism reports. Feces. Feces! They shit in the drawers. Who does this? According to John Wilson, the backlash was swift. Mack retaliated, accusing the Binghamton... I can't say their name. Mack retaliated, accusing the Binghamton Crosbys of vandalizing the venue and defiling their hotel rooms. Then, incredibly, the dispute made its way to the dean of Binghamton University, who allegedly told Wilson he would be expelled if he didn't call Allison Mack and apologize. That apology went right here on this very message board from the Crosbys. We'd like to apologize for the controversy caused by our actions this past weekend. In an ill-conceived attempt to learn the truth, we bombarded Allison Mack and Nikki Klein with questions at the after-party in Troy. Our approach was brash and antagonistic, and we completely understand that Allison and Nikki may have felt harassed and uncomfortable. If you want to hear this entire story, straight from someone who lived it, be sure to watch Season 2, Episode 4 of How To with John Wilson on HBO, titled How to Appreciate Wine. Just when the message board couldn't get any stranger, NXIVM's inner circle made their presence known. Not just a recruiter, not just an event organizer, Clare Bronfman herself logged in. For those unfamiliar, Clare wasn't just a member of NXIVM. She was one of its biggest financial backers. A Seagram's heiress worth hundreds of millions, she used her vast wealth to fund Keith Raniere's empire, bankroll lawsuits against his enemies, and silence critics whenever they appeared. And now, here she was, furiously typing out a response on a college a cappella message board. She starts with a full, unwavering endorsement of NXIVM. I am the organizer of Cappella Innovations, and Keith Raniere is a dear friend of mine, and I am deeply connected to NXIVM. Right away, there's no attempt to downplay the connection. In fact, she doubles down. This isn't just an a cappella festival, it's a NXIVM event, and she personally brought Raniere into it. Then she pivots to an aggressive defense, not of the festival, but of Keith Raniere himself. Keith tends not to talk about his achievements and has always kept very quiet about the people he knows. Is he money-driven? Although his past businesses have put him in a profit position of over $1 million a month, he did not take this money and lives in the same house he has for the last 20 years. An $80,000 in purchase price. Condominium in a small suburban neighborhood. It's classic NXIVM spin. Raniere isn't a cult leader, he's a humble genius who could have been rich but chose to live simply. Never mind the fact that Bronfman was personally funding his entire lifestyle. Then she puts out NXIVM's go-to tactic, name-dropping powerful and respected people to legitimize the organization. Nancy Seisman, my sister, and I had a personal meeting last month with the Dalai Lama on Keith's ethics program and children's school. We have a second meeting with the Dalai Lama this week. NXIVM loved to use high-profile connections as a shield against criticism. The reasoning? If we're really a cult, then why are we meeting with the Dalai Lama? Then she goes even bigger. Some people who have taken NXIVM programs: Sheila Johnson, co-founder of BET, Sir Richard Branson, Dr. Ivan Meisner, CEO of BNI, members of 3 past first families of Mexico, many prominent actors, musicians, and athletes. Do you think a recommendation from Keith Raniere could help a cappella? Let's pause for a second because this is wild. First, there's zero evidence that Richard Branson ever took NXIVM courses, but they kept using his name anyway. Second, the idea that Keith Raniere's approval could help a cappella is laughable, as if his endorsement would somehow take vocal harmonies to the next level. And then she drops the most chilling line of all. If you believe the Christian Snyder suicide story, you should probably examine it more closely. Christian Snyder was a former NXIVM member who vanished after an intensive workshop. Her abandoned truck was found with a handwritten note blaming NXIVM for her mental state. Her body was never recovered. And here was Clare Bronfman, NXIVM's financer, logging into a random a cappella message board and actively trying to discredit the entire story. This wasn't about defending a cappella innovations anymore. This was about NXIVM realizing that their little side project had been exposed and scrambling to shut it down. As the thread spiraled into chaos, another NXIVM insider decided to weigh in. Nikki Klein, best known at the time for her role as Callie Henderson on Battlestar Galactica. Though not as famous as Allison Mack, she was still a recognizable face in the entertainment industry, making her presence in the a cappella community all the more unexpected. But like Mack, Klein was more than just an attendee. She was deeply embedded in NXIVM's inner circle. And now, well, she had something to say. Klein's post reads more like a deeply wounded open letter to the a cappella community, but make no mistake, her response is just as calculated. She opens with a classic NXIVM move, positioning herself as the real victim. I take very seriously which organizations I choose to associate with, support, and lend my name to, not to mention my time. In fact, instead of writing this, I should be getting ready for a trip to London and Germany, for which I leave in a few hours, where I'll get paid to appear, answer questions, and to be perfectly honest, put forth much less effort than I did this past weekend at a cappella Innovations. Translation: I'm a celebrity. I have better things to do than defend myself from you and greats. I think it's important to express that I have never in my career experienced the disrespect and lack of mindfulness as I did from participants of this past a cappella festival. She doesn't stop there. She accuses the critics of being closed-minded, immature, and launching an attack against people who were only trying to help. I feel upset and saddened that people whom I believed shared my values of expression, exploration, growth, and improving performance have turned around and instigated a closed-minded attack on the organizations and people involved. In her eyes, the festival wasn't the problem. The real issue? The disrespectful and reactionary behavior of those questioning NXIVM's involvement. I am left now only to ponder whether it's even worth my time and effort to involve myself in engagements such as this, where people are disrespectful, immature, and create and perpetuate absurd accusations instead of critically pursuing the truth. Position yourself as a generous, selfless figure, giving your time to the community. Frame any criticism as an irrational attack. Having said this, I leave myself optimistically open to those who are genuinely curious about my involvement, our company, and my opinions on the matter. It's the NXIVM version of a backhanded compliment, essentially saying, I'll talk to you, but only if you're approaching this in the right way, i.e., unquestioning acceptance. In hindsight, this post is a chilling glimpse into Klein's mindset. Lauren Salmez, daughter of NXIVM president Nancy Salmez, entered the discussion with a strong sense of Keith Raniere, calling him, quote, a humble and gentle person, always respectful of others, and always seeking to find, inspire, fuel, and uphold the good in all things. She framed NXIVM as a misunderstood self-improvement organization, dismissing criticism as fear-driven misinformation, writing, Please consider, the Salem witch trials were based on a similar type of logic as the cult accusations. If you accuse me of being in a cult, there's no possible way I could ever say I'm not and have you believe me." At the time, she presented herself as a devoted insider, but years later, she would take the stand as a key witness against Raniere, admitting to her role in NXIVM's crimes. But then, one of the most legendary voices in the room stepped into the fray. Deke Sharon, often referred to as the father of modern a cappella. He had built a reputation as one of the most respected figures in the community. His involvement lent credibility to any event he touched, which made his growing unease with NXIVM's influence at a cappella innovations all the more significant. Unlike others who dismissed concerns or outright defended NXIVM, Deke demanded answers, and he wasn't afraid to challenge Clare, Mack, Klein, and the other NXIVM folks directly. "Thank you so much for responding in detail," he began, acknowledging Clare's lengthy post defending NXIVM and its founder, Keith Raniere. But from there, his message was pointed, methodical, and unrelenting. He zeroed in on the elephant in the room. Why was an organization with no prior connection to a cappella suddenly pouring massive resources into a niche college event? I gotta say, you guys are dumping all this money and time into college a cappella. Why not free Tibet or AIDS research or global hunger? The implication was clear. What was the real agenda? Then came his most direct challenge. If NXIVM wasn't a cult, why did every credible source online suggest otherwise? When doing a big web search, I have to say I can't find any positive articles about either Keith or NXIVM. Any idea why? The weight of that question hung in the air. Clare had painted NXIVM as an elite, self-improvement group. But Deke's words cut through the carefully curated narrative. Deke wasn't just asking questions, he was demanding transparency. Your organization is built largely on one man's credibility, and that credibility is suspect throughout any media reports I could find online, he stated plainly. He even put forth a challenge. If NXIVM had nothing to hide, why was Keith silent? "Keith, please speak up. We're chatty too," he wrote, almost daring Raniere to break his silence. Deke's words were impossible to ignore. If someone like him, a titan in the a cappella world, a respected voice, was questioning NXIVM's role, then everyone else had to start questioning it too. This is probably my favorite part of this time capsule. The reason I'm spending time reading through a 20-year-old deleted message board thread. Although, this might actually be one of my favorite pastimes. One of NXIVM's highest-ranking members logged in. Not just a recruiter, not just an event organizer. Mark Vicente himself, the man who would later help take NXIVM down with his testimony and documentary, was here, passionately defending the cult. At the time, Vicente was all in. He didn't just defend NXIVM, he went on the attack, dismissing criticism as irrational hysteria. "Some of what I read sounds like refreshing critical thinking," he wrote. Some of it nonsensical conjecture, and then some of it emotionally reactive, absurd fear-mongering. He compared accusations against NXIVM to propaganda tactics used by the apartheid-era South African government, arguing that calling NXIVM a cult is just a way to silence dissent. And then, in what may be one of the most surreal moments of the entire thread, he gave his personal endorsement of Keith Raniere. I've known Keith Raniere for about 3 years now. I'm very fortunate to call him my friend. He didn't stop there. He elevated Raniere to almost mythical status. George Lucas had Joseph Campbell as a mentor, and I'm fortunate enough to have Keith as an advisor in my filmmaking endeavors. But the real kicker? The final part, in hindsight, makes this post so chilling. Vicente's portrayal of Raniere as almost a saint-like figure. This is a guy who lives very simply. He owns very little, doesn't drive a car, took a vow of nonviolence many years ago. He even described Raniere's obsessive frugility as proof of his goodness, claiming he was so conscious of his ecological impact that he would tear off only tiny pieces of a paper towel to use. Raniere wasn't a cult leader, he was an enlightened guru, too pure for this world, and Vicente wasn't just repeating the party line, he truly believed it. What makes this so remarkable is that years later, Vicente would become one of NXIVM's loudest and most demanding critics. He would testify in court about the psychological manipulation he had suffered, expose Raniere's abuses in The Vow, and work tirelessly to help take the group down. But on April 10th, 2008, in this thread, he was still a believer. Keith Raniere himself, the so-called vanguard of NXIVM, decided to weigh in. "Sorry I've taken so long to post," he begins, casually inserting himself into the chaos. "For the last 2 days at least, this thread appears to be an ever-shifting list of questions and answers. I will start from the present and answer one question at a time in subsequent posts, attempting to be diligent with my presence." Yuck, that came out strange. What followed was a long, rambling response that veered between faux philosophical musings, veiled threats, and above all, the relentless dodging of direct questions. NXIVM is not a business, it's inspiring humanity. NXIVM is a method to inspire humanity, and its primary objective is not to earn money for the owners. In this way, NXIVM and Cappella are sisters, both derived from the same thing. Cappella and NXIVM spiritual siblings. That was a stretch, to say the least. With respect to Cappella support and Tibet, AIDS, global hunger, etc., they're in different categories. Depending on your beliefs, your list comprises effects of humanity's ethics. NXIVM affects those ethics directly. So does Cappella. The message board wasn't buying it. As one user, Chris, sarcastically put it, "Oh, wait a minute. This is all part of the Lost experience, right? NXIVM's really part of the Hanzo Foundation." This discussion was taking place at the height of Lost airing on ABC. It was a popular topic at the time. If Keith Raniere thought he could charm his way through the conversation, he clearly had not met Deke Sharon. Deke had been steadily dismantling NXIVM's arguments throughout the thread, and he wasn't about to let Raniere get away with his evasions. First, Deke went after the lack of any positive press about NXIVM. This does bring up the question again. Why so much bad press and no good press? If you have had a significant positive impact on thousands of people's lives, why isn't this reflected in those people's books, movies, blogs, newspaper articles, testimonies, etc.? Then he pressured Raniere on his legal troubles, demanding clarity on why his past business ventures had faced multi-state investigations. Why did 17 states come after your business? And what was the business? But perhaps his sharpest challenge was regarding NXIVM's secrecy and cult-like structure. While Raniere had tried to dismiss accusations of NXIVM being a cult as a mere paradox, Deke wasn't having it. Modern ethical theory largely rejects hierarchies, as they've been used so destructively throughout history to suppress people based on sex, race, sexual orientation, age, money, etc. Equality is commonly accepted and understood to be the most ethical way to treat others. As such, why do you have a clearly defined hierarchy in your organization? Titles, colored sashes, handshake protocol, standing when someone of higher rank enters the room, proper greetings, etc., when reinforcing status would seem to contradict accepted ethical theory. Raniere predictably had no real answer. As the conversation continued to spiral, Clare Bronfman, and NXIVM's deep-pocketed benefactor, stepped back in to propose a resolution. "So, evidently we have a situation that is more complex and requires more thought and discussion than on this forum. The back-and-forth static nature of a bulletin board has its limitations. And I believe we have encountered them." In other words, we're getting obliterated in this discussion, and we need to get out of it. She then offered 4 ways to move forward, including private discussions with Cappella leaders and an agreement to agree to disagree. For many watching, this was the moment they realized just how deep NXIVM tactics ran. Raniere had failed to meaningfully answer any questions. Clare had attempted damage control, and now one of the groups involved was apparently confessing to wrongdoing. One user, Jazzy Danziger, had enough. "Wow, yeah, brilliant, okay. Guys, this is all just a bit too much for me. I'm out of here until the forum rights itself again." One of my favorite forum takedowns was from Matthew Weiser, who decided to take a deep dive into Keith Raniere's patents to see if this so-called vanguard really was the genius his followers claimed. What he found was far from impressive. Most of Raniere's patents were designed patents for NXIVM sashes, essentially securing the color, shape, and structure of the organization's cult-like ranking system. Beyond that, his other patents largely involved early 90s video conferencing technology, hardly groundbreaking innovations. But the real kicker, Raniere's attempt to patent his rational inquiry method, the core of NXIVM's supposed self-improvement program, was rejected because it was too vague and lacked a, quote, inventive step. In other words, patent examiners found it indistinguishable from existing concepts. Even more damning, Weiser discovered that NXIVM's so-called secret training materials were actually available in public patent filings, contradicting the organization's repeated insistence that these materials could not be shared. This revelation completely undercut NXIVM's claims of proprietary knowledge, exposing it as little more than a repackaged collection of self-help jargon. At this point, the tide had fully turned against NXIVM. As the thread spiraled into over 200 posts spanning 14 pages, Keith Raniere himself returned to make one last attempt at damage control. The man known as Vanguard to his followers was now cornered on a college a cappella message board, forced to defend not just a cappella innovations, but his entire organization. In a lengthy, rambling post addressed to critics Ben Stevens and Deke Sharon, Raniere tried desperately to separate NXIVM from the a cappella festival. None of this was to recruit people for NXIVM, he insisted. In fact, we used our contacts through NXIVM to extensively recruit for the a cappella community. But his explanation grew increasingly bizarre as he attempted to justify NXIVM's secrecy. Referring to ongoing legal battles, he wrote, "Imagine if someone accused you of being a murderer and cited as evidence you were a 6-foot-tall female with long blonde hair. Would you correct them before your hearing so they could change their story? We won't either." In a telling moment of hubris, Raniere signed his post as, quote, "Vanguard of NXIVM, poor but earnest dresser, settler of a B-League volleyball team." An attempt at self-deprecating humor that fell flat against the serious concerns being raised. The community wasn't buying it. An anonymous user under the name Unique Alias challenged Raniere's claim that NXIVM was too intellectual for many people, pointing out the contradiction in claiming to advance humanitarian ethics while restricting access to an elite few. But it was again Deke Sharon who delivered the final, devastating blow. In a post that would effectively end the thread, Sharon methodically dismantled NXIVM's ethical claims by comparing Raniere's actions to history's greatest moral teachers. Would the leader who found this epic, transformative, ethical mythology carefully conceal and patent that information? Sharon asked. Moreover, would he charge each person between $300 and $10,000 per class to take upwards of 30 courses to learn this information? Is that what Buddha would do? Sharon continued, questioning every aspect of NXIVM's structure, from its patented colored sashes to its lawsuits against critics. "I see power, money, control, and paranoia," he concluded. With moral clarity that resembled throughout the community, Sharon announced he could not in good conscience attend any further a cappella innovations events, fearing his involvement would signal support for an organization he believed posed potential danger. Another lawsuit, another breakdown, another suicide. And that is not something I want on my conscience. As a matter of ethics, Sharon wrote, drawing his line in the sand. Game, set, and match. The thread soon went quiet. NXIVM abandoned a cappella, and 10 years later, the cult would come crashing down. What unfolded on that a cappella message board in 2008 was more than just an odd collision of worlds. It was the first public exposure of NXIVM's recruitment tactics and the earliest act of collective resistance against Keith Raniere's growing empire. 10 years before federal agents would raid NXIVM headquarters, before the New York Times expose on DOS, before the testimonies and trials that would finally bring down Vanguard, a group of college singers and their mentors recognized the warning signs and refused to be silent. Had NXIVM succeeded in establishing a foothold in the collegiate a cappella community with its thousands of bright, idealistic students from prestigious universities across the country, they might have secured a pipeline of recruits that could have expanded their reach exponentially. What's most striking about this forgotten thread is how many of the participants would later play crucial roles in NXIVM's downfall. Mark Vicente, Laurel Salzman, and more would later become the prosecution's star witnesses, testifying for days about the organization's abuses and breaking down on the stand, as he called it, horrible evil. In the end, the first real challenge to NXIVM's predatory recruitment didn't come from the FBI or investigative journalists. It came from a ragtag community of college students, a cappella nerds, and forum posters who refused to be gaslit. Armed with nothing but sharp questions and sharper harmonies, they exposed the cracks in NXIVM's carefully curated facade long before the world caught on. This thread remains a testament to the quiet power of ordinary people paying attention, proving that sometimes the most important resistance doesn't start with breaking news or federal raids. It starts with a community that simply refuses to look away.